We are Pro Cannabis Media.
All right, welcome back to Cannabis Chat for a Wednesday afternoon. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media, and every Wednesday when we do our live stream for 2 hours from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern, we call it Professor Weed Wednesdays because we like to talk to educators about cannabis. And Lord knows we all understand there's so much to learn about this plant, no matter what type of industry or your interest in it in any capacity. Rob Mejia continues to stay with us. And now we're joined by Bob Solomon. And he is he's been practicing law since 1972. So you're dating yourself a little bit there, Bob, but you are also a clinical professor at Yale Law School. And now you're co-director of UCal Irvine's Center for the Study of Cannabis. So Bob Solomon, thank you so much for joining us here.
My pleasure.
Tell us about the Center for the Study of Cannabis in UCal Irvine and how long it's been around, and what are some of the courses of study that you offer at that university?
Well, we've been around really since California legalized recreational cannabis a few years ago.
Okay.
The statute provides that there will be funds available, $12 million a year for 10 years, to University of California schools, California public schools, to study cannabis. So virtually every school, of course, immediately formed something. And we were the only, UC Irvine was the only campus that formed a joint medical legal partnership. So as it turns out, Daniele is a researcher for about 30 years on cannabis issues, so it was great. And my own research goes back, you noted I was in school, graduated law school in 72, which means I graduated college in 69, and my own research in cannabis is even longer than Daniele's, but not quite as rigorous. I like to note that I was introduced to cannabis in the living room of a guy named Mike the Russian in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And his research included putting a towel under the door so the fumes would not get out. So I have researched for a while. We formed the center and we do a variety of things. It's really the two of us and a few volunteers. We have other faculty members who are doing different work. We're concerned about a lot of issues. We are largely concerned about the racism and false image that has been portrayed about cannabis as a medicine, and how that has all not only impacted communities adversely, but also effectively prevented research. So we have spent a fair amount of effort in trying to publicize all of this, expand the opportunities for research, and Daniele, of course, is a researcher at the same time. And
we hope that Daniele Piomelli will join us at some point.
We emailed it half an hour ago, so I don't know what's going on, but what can I say?
We actually have a staffer behind the scenes who's probably reaching out now and whatever contact info she might have, and to try and walk them through. You know, the whole Zoom world, Bob, is completely different than we've ever had to deal with before. And some people are still challenged by it and some are not. I just sat on a media panel with Rob Mejia, who's also here with us. And we too even had some challenges, didn't we, Rob?
Beginning, yes. We had a few technical difficulties, but then we figured it out. We soldiered on.
That's right. Go ahead, Rob.
Because I teach clinical courses, I have 25 scheduled Zoomed meetings every week. Sometimes if I have 10 minutes in between, I go out on my porch and close my eyes. There's my friend, Daniele Piomelli.
Hello, guys. Sorry for being late. Can you hear me, first of all?
Yes, first of all, I can hear you. And Daniele Piomelli, did I say your name right? Daniele Piomelli.
That's fine. That's perfect. Thank you.
Now, I understand that you've spent a little time in Italy, I guess, right?
I did spend about 25 years of my life there before, converting and becoming an American now. I'm not sure exactly why I did that, but it's okay.
We can get into that at another time. But your background is mostly in research, biological chemistry, anatomy, and neurobiology. I mean, this is one of the things that I love about getting in the cannabis world and doing some interviews with people, because all of you are so much smarter than I am. I was a sportscaster for 30 years, okay? So I interviewed a lot of athletes, let's just say.
Okay.
That being said, how many times can you ask, how do you feel and what's wrong with your shoulder? So point being, now that I'm interviewing experts, botanists, PhDs, doctors of science, and it's amazing to me. So I appreciate both of you taking the time to come in. And I'm also joined by Rob Mejia, who is also a professor at Stockton University in New Jersey. So that kind of sets the stage for our discussions here. And Daniele, let me ask you immediately, right back at you. There was some talk in Italy, okay, about CBD. There was some debate in the government there. At some point, they wanted to call it a narcotic. Can you enlighten me a little bit about that and why that happened? And now that the European Union has accepted it, what's going on in Europe as far as research of cannabis and use of it?
Well, that is a complicated question because there are multiple states of the union, and I am hardly familiar with almost anything that goes on over there. But so each individual nation, each individual country has got their own legislation, right? And for example, France is extremely restrictive, whereas Italy has a little bit more of medicinal cannabis actually is legal. Medicinal cannabis is legal there. It is distributed through pharmacies. The pharmacist is the point of contact with the public. The doctor will have to write a prescription, and the pharmacist fills it, and it's covered by the national health care. So it is at zero cost to the taxpayer. It is limited in its use to conditions that are medically established, but unfortunately there are so few of them that I think there is a lot of leeway in that arena. I was just on a video conference with a friend of mine and medical doctor there who told me that he prescribes it to patients, elderly people with Alzheimer's disease who are very agitated. And in his hands, and I know this from other sources, is actually quite effective and is a lot less toxic than other drugs that are currently used, like creatine, for example. Antipsychotic drugs are used for that purpose. Often the last stages of Alzheimer's disease are accompanied by a lot of florid delusions, and makes it very hard mostly on the caretakers. But apparently cannabis helps there. So that's for Italy. France, as I said, is much more restrictive. England has pretty much the same situation as Italy does. But if you go over each individual country, I will have to spend another hour on this. And honestly, I'm not an expert in this area. Legislation is actually Professor Solomon's, my good friend Bob's specialty, right?
Right, Bob?
I want to throw in a couple quick things since we went the international route. One strange thing about Italy is they actually had the military growing their cannabis. They actually might still be. I know that was the case as of about at least even a year ago, but they have the military involved. I think that's very interesting. And then there's 2 European countries where insurance covers cannabis, actually kind of 3. So Germany is 1, Czech Republic is 2, although Czech Republic only used 35 pounds of marijuana last year, so it's such a small market. We don't really talk about it. Israel pretty much is covered that way. They have a cap on the expenses. That's 3 of them. And going to Latin America, Colombia announced that they're going to allow insurance to cover their patients. And the big thing with that is Colombia has 94% of their population has insurance. That's going to be a big market. So anyway, that's my little international trivia, and I'll get back to the smarter professors now.
Well, Bob, I know you're a child of the 60s too, which I think is great. Can you believe, by the way, it's 2020, you're in California, completely different planet. We're talking about cannabis as a legal entity. We've got 15 states now that have voted in an adult use program. I mean, do you pinch yourself sometimes and say, is this really happening?
It is hard to believe, but what is also hard to believe is to me is the product and the potency of the product. So I will confess, I shouldn't say this, but back in the day, we would smoke a little bit and take a ride to get something to eat. And the first time I smoked legal cannabis in California, I had 3 hits, and I said to my wife, "Holy shit! There's no way I could drive a car." I mean, I'm like
Wasted.
really stoned bonkers here. This is not what I was used to. So it's interesting, and it's a problem. I mean, it is a problem.
Right. Well, it's a problem because you have to learn how to self-medicate. And Daniele, I'm going to guess, as a scientist, someone who understands the cannabinoids and the endocannabinoid system and the role that metabolism plays in everybody, it's challenging when you talk to people about saying, it's going to have a different effect on you and you and you and you, because we're all different. Now they're growing the as Bob has explained, high percentage THC. And as someone who handles chronic pain, I'm always looking for that ratio of CBD and THC so I can get a little high, but more importantly, get rid of the inflammation. When you research and you look at this plant, we're still scratching the surface, aren't we, on what we know about it?
Yeah, it is interesting because we have really a very large amount of data on cannabis, very, very large. We have tens of thousands of papers published on THC, on the cannabinoids. And in the last 10 years, there has been really a flurry of work done. The problem is that some crucial questions still are not answered. And one of the main reasons is legislation, because we can do a lot of work, but sometimes some of the most important work, it's very, very hard to do, or almost impossible to do, because of the legislative landscape. The reason, the limits are put to research, but also the difficulty in finding the appropriate funding to support a certain type of studies. So we do know a huge amount. Some key questions are still unanswered. And to your point, my recommendation is always, if you use cannabis for medicinal purposes, or even for recreational purposes, consider that, as Bob said, this is a different cannabis from used to be, and consider that is something you need to respect because it has a lot of activity. So start low and educate yourself, and stop when you feel that you got to the point that you want to. And this, unfortunately, is not completely satisfactory. So some of us, including myself, we would like to be able to say, here is a recipe, follow it. But I don't think that we are there. And maybe we will never be there, at least in the next 10, 15 years. Where I would like to be 5 years from now is to be able to say, well, look, if you have certain forms of chronic pain, you should take this particular cannabis preparation, and it should be at this dose range. So start from here, and and when you get to a certain point and you still don't see any effect, stop, because cannabis is not working for you.
Right. It's going to, the plant is going to interact with your internal endocannabinoid system. That much we all know, but the effect it has, and you're right, it's start low and go slow. That's been the mantra. However, as you guys know, and maybe I'll go back to Daniele for a second here. When you ingest an edible versus an inhalation of the plant versus drinking a infused beverage, there are 3 different ways that the body reacts, and different organs that is being put into your system. There are different ways that the body reacts to those different titration methods, right?
Yeah, so for our viewers who are not pharmacologists, I'll say, first of all, inhalation, either vaping or smoking, occurs essentially in the lungs. So the absorption occurs in the lungs. The smoke or the vapor arrives in our lungs. The lungs are full of blood vessels.
Yep.
And from the lung parenchyma, so the tissue of the lung, and goes into the blood and then straight up into the brain. So it's a very, very fast route. That's why usually people prefer either smoking or vaping. People who are, for example, who have chronic pain usually do prefer that because they can titrate. They can stop when they feel the response and they stop right away. So everything that is ingested, it goes through a different path, right? It goes into the stomach, it goes into the intestine. In the intestine, that's where most of these fatty compounds like THC are absorbed. And then they still go into the circulation, but they have to pass through one crucial obstacle before we get to the brain, and that's our liver. Right. The liver filters out stuff, right? So, and when the famous THC, the most psychoactive of the components of cannabis, gets to the liver, it is metabolized, which means that it's converted to something else. So that liver metabolism typically has the function of removing toxins. But in the case of THC, it doesn't quite work like that, because before you get to something that is completely inactive, you go to something that is actually a little bit more active. So THC is converted to something that is more active than THC itself before being actually destroyed. So in the first pass through the liver, the first thing that happens is that you get this pretty active molecule. It has a name, 11-hydroxy delta-9 THC. And this guy gets to the brain, and it does a lot of stuff like THC, but it's a little bit more, it's got more punch than THC does. So now is an interesting thing. Women metabolize THC more than men do.
Huh.
Not just women, actually every female animal that I know of so far that we have studied has the same property. And that may explain why women are tendentially more, and that has been observed in many studies, more sensitive to the effects of cannabis. They tend to react actually more negatively to the drug than men do. That's sort of a little bit of a parenthesis, but to answer your question, yes, the two main routes of administration, which would be on one hand, smoking and vaping, on the other, drinking and eating, have deep differences that derive mostly from this metabolic step conducted by the liver. Now, there is, if I may, just one additional thing, there is also an issue of time, right? Because when you absorb through the lungs, it gets very quickly into your brain, and no metabolism. When you absorb through the intestine, it takes longer. So, the time to reach the maximum peak is shifted to the right. So it takes longer to get there. So sometimes you wonder, oh, okay, I had a brownie, nothing happened to me. I better have another brownie, right? Probably not a good idea. Probably not a good idea. But that's a reason why it's problematic. I think edibles tend to be a lot source of more trouble than they are worth it.
That's interesting you say that, because I agree 100%. It's a completely different reaction to your body. A head high versus a body high, if you will, or head intoxication with a body intoxication. So, and you have to experiment with yourself to see what makes sense and what doesn't. But Bob, before I want to get back to you, because I do want to talk about the center that you both are involved with, the study for cannabis at UCal Irvine. And one of the things you mentioned right away was one of the things you guys do talk about is how race plays a role. Now, we just learned, by the way, that gender plays a role. Now we recognize, just through statistics of arrest records and what have you, that it truly isn't a drug issue. It's a race issue, and it always has been. And law enforcement have used it for years to fill up the jails with too many people of color. So you have the stigma, you have the race issue. From your perspective as a lawyer and with a law background, you must be extremely upset when you look at the statistics and you see that there's been 511,000 arrests for cannabis possession versus 480,000 arrests for violent crimes. That's just a crazy stat. And I'm guessing it's one of the things that you have to talk about with your students too, right?
Yeah, I think it's important that people know not just that result. There certainly is what in law we would call a disparate effect. on people of color. And as you were alluding to, how police have used this over the years, but also how politicians have used it. We now have pretty good evidence that the Controlled Substances Act in 1970 was pushed by Nixon and the administration in large part to discredit the anti-war movement and the Black Power movement. But the people in the anti-war movement, which I was one, didn't go to jail. So we didn't go to jail. I hope you didn't go to jail. I did spend one night in jail, but it was not too bad. I was in a jail cell with Benjamin Spock, if you can believe it. That was interesting. So we have that situation, but clearly it's affected largely young African American men, and some of the drugs were planted, some were not. But it goes back way before that. The Hearst newspapers campaign throughout the 20s and 30s. Reefer Madness was meant to be an educational film and showing the dangers of the drug. The name marijuana, and I thank Daniele for cluing me into this, is itself racist as a way of tying the drug to Mexican farm workers and immigrants. And the whole notion, the whole campaign about the Marijuana Act of 1937 was that it will create violence in men and sexual promiscuity in women. And that great nightmare, the greatest nightmare of all in America, a white woman and a black man together sexually. I mean, that's the nightmare that was portrayed. And of course, that's the same exact nightmare as the founding of the Ku Klux Klan. So there really is a tremendous similarity in all of this. And this is a big part of what I try to teach students, not just the statistics, because they know the statistics already, but that the history is a scheme to put young black men in jail.
One quick point I'd like to add is I teach at Stockton University, and we actually have a minor in cannabis studies program there. And so this year I was teaching the Introduction to Medical Marijuana class and the Preparation for Cannabis internship class. And towards the end of the semester, I went to my advisor and I said, we need to change the name of our class. It should be called Introduction to Medical Cannabis for two reasons. One is we do talk about hemp, and we talk about hemp's role with CBD, and there are some medicinal properties there. So it's not as accurate. So we need to include that. And it's also a racist word. I'm actually second generation Mexican American, so it kind of hit home for me in particular. And so voila, in 2 days it was changed. So next semester I will be teaching the Introduction to Medical Cannabis class.
Congratulations.
Right.
Congratulations.
Oh, that's great. I was very happy a couple of weeks ago when one of my students was talking, not in a cannabis course, in another course, and said, well, as far as marijuana, I mean cannabis. I said, good, we're getting there. We're getting there, one person at a time.
And well, I can actually relate a story I told earlier about a retired pediatrician in Massachusetts named Dr. Eric Ruby. And he is involved with the Massachusetts Medical Society. And he was on a call, he said, on Saturday for 9.5 hours with like 200 members of that. And he has gotten the medical society to get rid of the M word and replace it with cannabis in all of their policy talk. And he was very excited about that. And, we all should be excited about that because it's another sign that perhaps we are breaking down some of the stigma. And, in California, I mean, you guys know it's been around since the mid 90s. I'm pretty sure it was 96, I think, when medical was first introduced in California. And It's been far more accepted in California. And yet there's so many different regulations now. I'm not quite sure the governance is where it should be either in California, but then again, it's California. So I understand that.
Yeah. We can assure you the governance is not where it needs to be.
Yeah.
You can take that as an absolute given fact.
Yeah. And especially on the social equity side of things too, they're having quite a bit of issues in Los Angeles, specifically, I guess, with the opportunities that they're trying. See, I think the intent is we want to try and help those that were most impacted on the war on drugs, but nobody knows how best to do it without perhaps creating a fund that is available to that community to get into this business. Is that
Yeah,
what
or partnerships. You know, I'll be out, you know, I do know how to do it. We all know how to do it. But you're absolutely right. It involves capital. Without capital, the small business can't succeed in this world. And whether it's through partnerships or grants and loans, either way will work. But we have not yet shown the political will to do that.
The other thing, and all of us being educators here, that we need is education. So if they have funding and partnerships, that's step one. But then they also need training on how the plant grows, how to work in a dispensary, all those practical things that they may have missed out on. So I do think that if you have like an incubator, you have some funding, and you have mentors or people who will help out, that's at least a good start. I would love to see that kind of program be rolled out.
Right. And of course, the MORE Act that was symbolically passed last Friday does have a component in it for a federal tax that would create that fund that would allow people to get involved in the business. Just closing thoughts, guys, about what you'd like to see happen at your Center for the Study of Cannabis at the University of California, Irvine, perhaps over the next few years, as we get more and more acceptance and you get more and more undergrads and people who are interested in making this a career and a business. Bob, what would you like to see happen as far as perhaps a different type of class, or what are some of the studies, areas of study you'd like to see the university expand on?
Well, I'm a clinical professor of law, which means that I have students working on behalf of real clients. I did that at Yale, and that's why I came here to start our community and economic development clinic. Students work on really complex real estate deals and other deals. I would like to see us have a cannabis clinic where we are representing those exact equity applicants that you're talking about, people who have suffered over past years, either individually, through family members, or through their communities, and work towards providing them serious and necessary legal services pro bono. We just closed a $10 million deal to allow residents to buy the mobile home park they live in, which will allow them to have an affordable rent in perpetuity, as opposed to having real estate developers take it over. We put in, $100,000, $200,000 worth of free legal services, and that's what we would like to do for in the cannabis world. And we can do that. My school is supportive. We have to find either my clone or someone else who will join me in this, but it'll happen. It'll come.
And Daniele, you're not working on a human cloning, are you?
No, please don't. Let's not go there. The idea of having another me running around gives me the creeps. So no. But from a scientific perspective, what we're looking at is two major issues. One is research, and the other is education, as was said before. Educationally, I think there is a lot of work to be done. I think we need to target, first of all, the physicians. We need to target the starting physicians, so medical students. They need to learn about cannabis, something that was not in the curricula. It's still pretty much not in any curriculum across the country. So we doing our little here at UCI. We have a medical school class that teaches, which I teach, which goes over cannabis, the benefits and the risks. And I think that way, the physician is primed to this whole issue. But I think, aside from them, we need to target nurses. We need to target, educators. So it's a long road ahead. Research-wise, I think you alluded it before. You said that what kind of questions we have still open. We have many questions open, but I think we need to answer one each of them by itself. So the first one, the low hanging fruit is the effect of medicinal cannabis on pain. We have already substantial evidence that it's effective in adults, and it is my hope that we as a center can contribute to understanding the real effectiveness and efficacy of cannabis preparations in various forms of chronic pain, neuropathic pain, inflammatory pain. This is something, an attainable goal that can be attained in the next 4 or 5 years if we work on this, if we are allowed to work on this. So my last plug is, this is a time for all of us who have this type of views on cannabis, we will take cannabis seriously, to press our lawmakers in DC to take the issue seriously and bring forward a bipartisan bill that has a chance of passing the Senate and to be signed by President Biden. It is a very, very important thing. President Biden himself does not necessarily have the latest ideas on cannabis. He's a very conservative viewpoint on cannabis, but I think it's just because he has not been educated by the science on the matter. So it is my hope that ears will perk up, and they, in DC, they will start asking questions, and we and many others are all very, very willing to go and explain and talk, so that we remove the one major obstacle to research, which is really the CSA and the scheduling of cannabis as a Schedule I drug.
Well, you know that the MORE Act was symbolic for sure, and I also know that the U.S. House is going to take up a research bill as well over the next few days, even before they adjourn for the year. So at least they are symbolically listening to people like yourselves and all of us here to make some changes. I think they recognize that changes have to be made, and now it's just a question of who gets what where and who's going to lead the way and what the final is. And what I always ask, and Bob, you'll appreciate this, when people ask, what's a good place to invest in the cannabis industry? And I say, invest in a good law firm. Because you're going to not only going to create the laws, but then you're going to have people challenging the laws, and it's just going to go on forever and ever as we interpret this whole new world that we're in. Guys, I so appreciate you taking the time out and joining us from the left coast. We wish you the best of luck at the University of Cal Irvine and the Center for the Study of Cannabis. Lord knows you've got an open forum and an opportunity to come here, perhaps recruit somebody from the East Coast as well. So again, I thank you both for joining us. Rob, always a pleasure. Love sitting on the media panel with you today. And you're always welcome on this show as well. So for everybody here at Pro Cannabis Media, remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.